In the spring of 1991, in the town of Elmbridge, the school year was winding down just like any other. The sun was warmer, the seniors were restless, and graduation loomed on the horizon. At Elmbridge Secondary, life moved at its own gentle rhythm. Announcements crackled over speakers, faded school buses wheezed into the lot, and students in neatly pressed uniforms chatted on wooden benches under the shade of an old oak tree. Among them were four inseparable girls, Ava, Brooke, Claire, and Danielle. They weren't the loudest or the most popular, but everyone knew them. Their laughter rang down the halls. Their notebooks were always organized, and they stuck together like pieces of the same soul. They were in the same class, wore matching sweaters in different shades, and took the same advanced courses, including a private after-school literature class with one of the school's most respected teachers, Mr. Graham Whitlock. Mr. Whitlock had been at the school for over 20 years. He was the kind of man who called every student young scholar and still used chalk instead of markers. He had a reputation for discipline, but he also had a way of making students feel seen, especially the quiet ones. All four girls attended his tuition class 3 days a week after school, always in the same order. They'd meet on the bench, near the old red station wagon in the parking lot, laugh a little, and then file into room 207. Everything was normal until Ava changed. It was subtle at first. She seemed tired, didn't laugh as much, and missed a few lunch breaks. Then she stopped coming to soccer practice. Her friends asked questions. She waved them off. 2 weeks later, she didn't show up for school. At first, everyone assumed she was sick. Her parents told the administration that she must have snuck out during the night. Her bed was untouched, her shoes were gone, and her school bag was still sitting under the desk in Mr. Whitlock's classroom. Panic rippled through the town. A 16-year-old girl had vanished from her home in the middle of the night without a single trace. No forced entry, no note, no call. Flyers were printed. The local news aired her photo, and the police opened an investigation, but nothing turned up. 10 days later, Brooke disappeared. Her parents swore they had locked the doors. She had eaten dinner, done her homework, and gone to bed. But by morning she was gone, just like Ava. Same pattern, same silence. This time, people noticed something else. Whispers started about both girls appearing off before they vanished, about how they would stop speaking when someone walked into the hallway during Mr. Whitlock's class, about how neither had spoken much to anyone in their final week. Then, 2 weeks later, Claire vanished. Same class, same age, same night routine, same eerie disappearance. Now the town wasn't just scared, it was frozen. Detectives were sent from the capital, every teacher was questioned, every locker was opened, and the school board held emergency meetings. The principal gave emotional speeches to the parents. Through it all, Mr. Whitlock stood quietly, suit ironed, hands folded, eyes heavy with what looked like grief. And then, nothing. No trace, no suspects, no answers. The final girl, Danielle, was kept under strict watch by her father. She wasn't allowed to leave school alone. Her bedroom door was kept open at night, and her father walked her to Mr. Whitlock's class personally each week. But then, one night, she vanished too. And what made it worse? Her father was Mr. Whitlock. The night Danielle disappeared, it rained harder than it had in months. The power had gone out across town, and in the Whitlock house, candles flickered across wood-paneled walls. Mr. Whitlock told the neighbors that Danielle had gone to bed early after dinner, that she was exhausted from her final exam preparations. He even remembered checking on her at midnight. Her window was locked, her school books were stacked neatly beside her pillow, but by morning she was gone. Her bed was undisturbed, her shoes were missing, and her school bag was untouched. Her father, the respected teacher whom parents trusted, with their daughters, called the police just after 6 a.m., his voice cracking with confusion and panic. "I don't understand," he said, shaking as officers arrived. "How could this happen again?" Detectives searched the house thoroughly. No signs of forced entry, no muddy footprints, no clue as to how Danielle, like the three before her, had vanished into the night. But something about this case felt different. This time, the missing girl was his own. The media storm that followed was relentless. The headlines were cruel. Fourth girl vanishes. This time it's the teacher's daughter. Pattern or coincidence? Parents demand answers. Yet, no charges were ever filed, no arrests, no suspects. People speculated endlessly. Some said it was human trafficking. Others believed it was someone inside the school. But the truth was, there were no fingerprints, no eyewitnesses, no evidence. Nothing but 4 empty spaces where 4 young lives had once glowed brightly. Below is the revised version of the text from your provided document, reformatted with proper grammar, punctuation, commas, full stops, question marks, etc., and sentence structure to ensure it is suitable for text-to-speech software. I have preserved the entire story without omitting any details, removed the asterisks, quotes, and ensured the text is grammatically correct for clear pronunciation. The text has been carefully edited to maintain the original narrative flow and meaning. The spring of 1991, in the town of Elmbridge, the school year was winding down just like any other. The sun was warmer, the seniors were restless, and graduation loomed on the horizon. At Elmbridge Secondary, life moved at its own gentle rhythm. Announcements crackled over speakers, faded school buses wheezed into the lot, and students in neatly pressed uniforms chatted on wooden benches under the shade of an old oak tree. Among them were 4 inseparable girls, Ava, Brooke, Claire, and Danielle. They weren't the loudest or the most popular, but everyone knew them. Their laughter rang. Down the halls, their notebooks were always organized, and they stuck together like pieces of the same soul. They were in the same class, wore matching sweaters in different shades, and took the same advanced courses, including a private after-school literature class with one of the school's most respected teachers, Mr. Graham Whitlock. Mr. Whitlock had been at the school for over 20 years. He was the kind of man who called every student young scholar and still used chalk instead of markers. He had a reputation for discipline, but he also had a way of making students feel seen, especially the quiet ones. All 4 girls attended his tuition class 3 days a week after school, always in the same order. They'd meet on the bench, near the old red station wagon in the parking lot, laugh a little, and then file into room 207. Everything was normal until Ava changed. It was subtle at first. She seemed tired, didn't laugh as much, and missed a few lunch breaks. Then she stopped coming to soccer practice. Her friends asked questions. She waved them off. 2 weeks later, she didn't show up for school. At first, everyone assumed she was sick. Her parents told the administration that she must have snuck out during the night. Her bed was untouched, her shoes were gone, and her school bag was still sitting under the desk in Mr. Whitlock's classroom. Panic rippled through the town. A 16-year-old girl had vanished from her home in the middle of the night without a single trace. No forced entry, no note, no call. Flyers were printed, the local news aired her photo, and the police opened an investigation, but nothing turned up. 10 days later, Brooke disappeared. Her parents swore they had locked the doors. She had eaten dinner, done her homework, and gone to bed, but by morning she was gone, just like Ava. Same pattern, same silence. This time, people noticed something else. Whispers started about both girls appearing off before they vanished, about how they would stop speaking when someone walked into the hallway during Mr. Whitlock's class, about how neither had spoken much to anyone in their final week. Then, 2 weeks later, Claire vanished. Same class, same age, same night routine, same eerie disappearance. Now the town wasn't just scared, it was frozen. Detectives were sent from the capital. Every teacher was questioned, every locker was opened, and the school board held emergency meetings. The principal gave emotional speeches to the parents. Through it all, Mr. Whitlock stood quietly, suit ironed, hands folded, eyes heavy with what looked like grief. And then, nothing, no trace, no suspects, no answers. The final girl, Danielle, was kept under strict watch by her father. She wasn't allowed to leave school alone. Her bedroom door was kept open at night, and her father walked her to Mr. Whitlock's class personally each week. But then one night, she vanished too. And what made it worse? Her father was Mr. Whitlock. The night Danielle disappeared, it rained harder than it had in months. The power had gone out across town, and in the Whitlock house, candles flickered across wood-paneled walls. Mr. Whitlock told the neighbors that Danielle had gone to bed early after dinner, that she was exhausted from her final exam preparations. He even remembered checking on her at midnight. Her window was locked, her school books were stacked neatly beside her pillow, but by morning she was gone. Her bed was undisturbed, her shoes were missing, and her school bag was untouched. Her father, the respected teacher whom parents trusted, with their daughters, called the police just after 6 a.m., his voice cracking with confusion and panic. "I don't understand," he said, shaking as officers arrived. "How could this happen again?" Detectives searched the house thoroughly. No signs of forced entry, no muddy footprints, no clue as to how Danielle, like the three before her, had vanished into the night. But something about this case felt different. This time, the missing girl was his own. The media storm that followed was relentless. The headlines were cruel. "Fourth girl vanishes. This time it's the teacher's daughter. Pattern or coincidence? Parents demand answers." Yet no charges were ever filed. No arrests. No suspects. People speculated endlessly. Some said it was human trafficking. Others believed it was someone inside the school. But the truth was, there were no fingerprints, no eyewitnesses, no evidence. Nothing but 4 empty spaces where 4 young lives had once glowed brightly. The town of Elmbridge began to rot in quiet disbelief. Parents withdrew their daughters from the school. Some moved away. Mr. Whitlock took a leave of absence. And just like that, the case went cold. 5 years passed. The missing girls became faded photos in plastic sleeves. Their names stopped being whispered in grocery store lines. The bench where they used to sit was removed. The red station wagon rusted in the faculty parking lot. Teachers changed, the school repainted its halls, and time moved on, except for one man, George Mallory, the school's janitor, or Mr. George as the kids used to call him. He never forgot. He had worked at Elmbridge Secondary for over 30 years. Quiet, humble, often invisible to staff and students alike. He remembered everything, where each girl used to sit, what days they had classes, even what books they returned late to the school library. And he remembered one thing no one else did: a key. There was an old supply room in the east wing of the school, just past the boiler room. It hadn't been used in years, but Mr. George had seen Mr. Whitlock enter it once, years ago, around the time Ava first went missing. It wasn't a storage closet. It was something else. He had told himself it didn't mean anything back then. Teachers had keys to all sorts of places. But now, in 1996, something compelled him to take another. Look, the door hadn't been opened in years. Rust clung to the knob like rot. With trembling hands, Mr. George used the master key. The moment he opened the door, a rush of cold air hit him. It didn't smell like cleaning supplies. It smelled like dust, mold, and silence. The room was empty, or so it seemed. But in the back corner, behind a false panel of shelves, there was a handle, almost unnoticeable unless you were looking for it. When he pulled it, the shelf creaked back. Behind it was a staircase leading down. Mr. George didn't go in that day. He closed the door, locked it, and called the police. Within 24 hours, the school was sealed off. A new task force was assigned, and suddenly the quiet town of Elmbridge found itself staring at old wounds they had long buried. Something had been hiding beneath that school, and they were about to uncover it. They brought in cadaver dogs first. The old supply room was sealed off with yellow tape, and officers from the state's cold case division arrived by the dozen. Mr. George stood outside the building, arms folded, watching quietly as they went down into the basement he had unlocked. What they found was nothing, at least not right away. Right. The basement beneath the shelf was narrow, dimly lit with a single rusted bulb that barely worked. Dust was thick, and the air smelled of wet concrete and decay. The room was empty but unusually clean, except for a few personal items. A faded hair ribbon, a notebook cover with the name Ava scratched lightly in pencil, and a silver charm bracelet engraved with the letter C. It wasn't enough to confirm anything, not yet, but it was enough to reopen the investigation officially. The town of Elmbridge, after 5 years of quiet shame, was now back in the headlines. The missing girls' families were called in for questioning again. Their old teachers were summoned, parents were interviewed, and students, now in their 20s, were revisited and asked if they remembered anything unusual. But no one mentioned Mr. Whitlock. Why would they? He was Danielle's father, the only man who had lost a daughter and taught the others. Everyone remembered how broken he had seemed after Danielle vanished. He stopped teaching altogether, his house fell into disrepair, and he was often seen walking alone through the park in silence. He had become hollow. He even agreed to cooperate with the investigation fully, gave access to his house, answered questions, and gave emotional interviews, saying, "If there's anything I can do to help find them, I will." The public grieved with him, cried with him. No one suspected. Instead, attention turned toward other potential leads. There was a substitute teacher from that same year who left abruptly, a man named Clay Durbin, who taught art for 1 semester before moving states. Some parents remembered he was too friendly with students. Detectives tracked him down and interrogated him for 2 days. Nothing. Then came the janitor, Mr. George himself. Online conspiracy theorists claimed he had known too much, that maybe he was planting items to shift blame. Anonymous calls flooded the station, and journalists harassed his granddaughter. Again, nothing. The trail went cold until Detective Laura Simmons found something odd. She was reviewing class schedules from 1991. Her approach was methodical, boring even, but in reviewing every teacher-student interaction, she noticed a pattern. All 4 girls, Ava, Brooke, Claire, and Danielle, had been marked present in room 207 every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon for extended literary study. That was Mr. Whitlock's private honors class. That wasn't strange. What was strange was that the class only existed for those 4 girls. There were no other students, no records of assignments, no grades logged, no parent approval forms, and strangest of all, the class was never listed in the official schedule, only handwritten in attendance logs in Mr. Whitlock's handwriting. She took this to the chief. He shrugged. It was probably a study group, he said. But Laura Simmons couldn't shake the feeling. Why would someone fabricate a class, and only for 4 students? And why were they all gone? She requested surveillance records. Of course, none existed. It was 1991. No cameras, just old keys and silence. But then something unexpected happened. From the boxes of old confiscated items stored in the school's archives, dusty shelves filled with broken calculators and old novels, Laura found something that wasn't listed in evidence. A disposable camera wrapped in a plastic lunch bag. It had no tag, no date. It was just there. She sent it for development. What came back changed everything. 12 photos, mostly blurry. Indoor shots, dusty hallways, a chalkboard, a group of desks pushed to the wall, a close-up of a single chair, and one photo, grainy and underexposed but just visible. A pair of legs, thin, in a school uniform, lying on the basement floor. No face, no context, just silence. And now, suspicion had returned. The photograph made its way around the task force in stunned silence. Detective Laura Simmons placed it under a magnifying glass, studying every blur, shadow, and line. Though the face was cropped out, the fabric was unmistakable. The same school-issued woolen skirt worn by Elmbridge Secondary's female students in the early 1990s. The same type the 4 missing girls had worn. The angle suggested the photo was taken in the basement, the hidden one below the shelf. But who took the photo? And why had it never been submitted into evidence? Laura questioned every faculty member from that year. Most of them were long retired or had moved away. No one remembered a missing camera. No one remembered seeing a student with one, and no one had a reason to believe anything sinister had occurred. Not until now. Mr. Whitlock was among those brought in again. "I don't recognize it," he said calmly, adjusting his glasses. "I never went down there, not once." He was polite, cooperative, and, as always, grieving. He spoke softly about Danielle, how she loved literature, and how she'd once said she wanted to become a teacher like him. When shown the photo, he stared at it for a long time before placing it down with trembling hands. "I hope this helps." "You find something," he whispered, and that was that. But behind the scenes, the task force was fracturing. Simmons believed this was more than coincidence. Others thought she was chasing ghosts. "We're spinning in circles," one detective muttered. "No one's going to confess after 5 years." But Laura wouldn't let go. She went back to the old attendance books, the janitor logs, and began cross-referencing the days the girls had vanished. There was something subtle, something easy to miss, but consistent. All 4 girls had stayed late on campus on the Thursday before their disappearance, not just for Mr. Whitlock's class, but for something else. According to the building access ledger, an old school physical sign-in sheet, each Thursday, Mr. Whitlock signed out a master key, the kind that opened every door in the school. Why would a teacher need that? She checked the logs. Out of 36 Thursdays that year, he had signed it out only on the 4 weeks the girls disappeared. Never before, never after. That was the first red flag. The second came from an unlikely source, an elderly librarian named Mrs. Carnes, who had worked in the school from 1978 to 2001. When Simmons visited her, she seemed confused at first. "Those girls," she said, sipping tea with shaky hands. "They always stayed after school. Sweet, quiet types, never caused trouble." "Do you remember anything odd?" Laura asked. "Anything strange in the days before they disappeared?" Mrs. Carnes paused, then nodded slowly. "Brooke came in one day," she whispered, "and tried to check out a copy of Pregnancy and Youth Psychology. I told her we couldn't issue those books to students without permission. She blushed, said it was for an essay, then asked if it could be kept off the record." Laura felt her breath catch. "And did you tell anyone?" Mrs. Carnes nodded, again. "I told Mr. Whitlock. He was her teacher, after all." Laura left the library with her head spinning. What were the girls trying to understand? Why were they going to him, not their parents? She searched the school nurses' logs next. Confidential. Reports filed away in drawers, and there it was. A slip dated March 15th, 1991. A note from a nurse stating that Ava had come in complaining of nausea, fatigue, and stress. She had asked not to be called home. The nurse had written, "Referred to guidance counselor and Mr. Whitlock per student request." One girl, then another, then another. Why would they go to him? That's when Simmons made a decision. She requested a search warrant for Mr. Whitlock's house. The house had not changed much since Danielle vanished. The wallpaper still peeled. In the corners, books were stacked along the stairs, and a dusty photo of Danielle smiling with braces still hung above the fireplace. Mr. Whitlock stood aside without protest. "Please," he said, "do whatever you need." It was almost frustrating how helpful he remained. In his office, everything looked normal. Old novels, lesson plans, a dusty typewriter. But in the drawer of his desk, Laura found something odd. an unmarked envelope containing 6 photographs. None were inappropriate. All appeared to be taken at school. The girls in the hallway, Ava sitting under the old oak tree, Brooke in the science lab, Claire near the bench, Danielle by her locker. It wasn't illegal, but it was strange. Why would a teacher have private photos of 4 girls who had gone missing? When asked, Mr. Whitlock said simply, "They were for the yearbook. I was helping with the editorial team before everything happened." Detectives verified the claim. He had indeed volunteered for the 1991 yearbook committee. Still, something felt wrong. Back at the station, Simmons laid out every detail on a corkboard: dates, names, photos, fragments of surveillance, quotes from faculty, trying to force them into a pattern. They just wouldn't align, not unless she took a step back. What if the 4th girl, Danielle, wasn't like the others? What if she didn't vanish the same way? What if she never vanished at all? Detective Simmons stood alone in the cold, dusty records room of Elmbridge Police Station, flipping through every witness statement from the original investigation. One name kept surfacing, not as a suspect, not even as someone with critical information, but as a ghost in the margins. Danielle Whitlock, the last of the 4 girls to disappear, the daughter of the most respected teacher in town, and curiously, the one with the least amount of recorded information. No confirmed sightings that day, no final conversation with a friend, no diary entries, no locker searches noted, just missing, as though she'd slipped silently from the world. And yet Simmons couldn't let go of one question. What if Danielle didn't vanish like the others? She returned to the town, this time alone, walking through the halls, now abandoned for summer break. In the old English classroom, room 207, she stood where Danielle once sat, where all 4 girls once learned under Mr. Whitlock's careful eye. Her eyes fell on the corkboard above the chalkboard, faded outlines still visible where papers had been pinned. Suddenly, a quiet voice behind her spoke. "You're looking for ghosts." It was Principal Holloway, retired now, but still living, nearby. "I always wondered why they never found those girls, and I always wondered why Danielle's room was the only one cleared out." Simmons turned. "What do you mean?" He stepped closer, his voice lowering. "The other girls, Ava, Brooke, Claire, their rooms still had stuff in them, books, pencils, little notes. But Danielle's, empty, like someone knew she wasn't coming back. That detail hadn't been in the original report." Simmons felt her stomach tighten. "Did you ever mention this to anyone?" Holloway shook his head. "It didn't seem important back then. I thought maybe Mr. Whitlock cleared it out." But Mr. Whitlock had told police he left her room untouched. Something wasn't adding up. Back at the precinct, Simmons began listening through hours of cassette tapes recorded during the 1991 interviews. One caught her attention, a session with Claire's mother dated 2 days after Claire's disappearance. At the 17-minute mark, the voice of the interviewer asked, "Did Claire ever talk about someone making her uncomfortable at school?" There was a pause. Then Claire's mother said, "She once said she didn't like being alone after class, that someone always asked her to stay, but she wouldn't say who. She said it was complicated. I thought it was just a crush." Simmons paused the tape. The statement hadn't been followed up. She scribbled the words onto her case file. Someone always asked her to stay. It was time to go deeper. Simmons requested a second warrant for Danielle's room, reluctantly granted by the judge due to insufficient evidence but escalating public interest. Simmons returned to Mr. Whitlock's house, this time with 2 officers. Mr. Whitlock looked genuinely distressed. "I don't understand. I've already let you search everything." "Not Danielle's bedroom," Simmons said gently. He hesitated, then gave a slow nod. Upstairs, the room was a time capsule. The bed was still neatly made, posters of horses. Hung on the walls, a dusty stereo sat in the corner, and a faded red backpack leaned by the closet door. Simmons noticed a floorboard near the nightstand that didn't quite sit flat. She knelt and pried it up. Inside was a box, old, sealed with tape yellowed by time. She opened it. Inside was a collection of handwritten letters, neatly folded. She unfolded one, and her breath caught. "Dear Mr. Whitlock, I know we said we wouldn't write anything down, but I needed to say this. I thought what we had was something special, but lately I don't feel safe. You keep saying we're meant to be, that no one else understands us, but this secret is eating me alive. I can't do this anymore. I can't keep lying to my friends. I can't pretend it's okay. Please stop asking me to stay after class." D. This wasn't from a student to a teacher. It was from a girl to someone who had crossed every line. Danielle had written it to her own father. Suddenly the veil of innocence around Mr. Whitlock began to shred. But not for the world, not yet. To the town, to the school board, to the grieving community. Mr. Whitlock was still the tragic father who had lost his only daughter, the man who cried softly in interviews and never remarried. The man who had nothing to hide. Only Simmons now knew the truth was beginning to flicker through the cracks. But she needed more. She needed proof. It was almost midnight when Simmons found herself parked outside the school once again. She'd gone through every file, every statement, every box of evidence logged during the 1991 investigation. And yet, the most critical clue, the letters from Danielle, had never been found, never even known to exist, hidden by someone who'd known exactly what they meant. Simmons stared out the windshield at the quiet campus. Memories of the missing girls pressed in from every shadow. Ava's bright laugh echoing in the gym. Brooke always the last to leave the library. Claire dancing down the hallway with her Walkman. Clipped to her jeans, and Danielle, always quiet, always polite, always overshadowed by her father's presence. Suddenly, something clicked in Simmons' mind. Every girl, all three victims, had something in common besides age and school. They had each attended after-school tutoring sessions with Mr. Whitlock, and the fourth, Danielle, lived with him. Why hadn't anyone connected this before? The school had changed over the years, but Simmons still found her way to the old maintenance door tucked behind the auditorium. It creaked open. The halls were silent. Dust motes hung like snow in the dim emergency lighting. She made her way toward the boiler room, but halfway there, she stopped. Behind a janitor's closet was a service hatch, one she hadn't seen during the first walkthrough. It looked like it hadn't been opened in years. She pried it open with her flashlight. A narrow stairwell descended into pitch blackness. The basement was cold and smelled of mold, dust, and something metallic. Simmons clicked on her flashlight. The beam fell across stacked boxes, crumbling insulation, and finally something else. A steel door, heavy, industrial. She approached slowly. The doorknob was scratched, the lock rusted. She twisted it, locked tight. But something about it felt wrong. She called in backup. Within the hour, 2 uniformed officers arrived. They pried open the door, and what they found behind it made everyone stop breathing. It was a small, soundproofed room with padded walls, a single mattress on the floor, and a chain bolted to the far wall with a soft leather cuff at the end. In the corner, a rusted metal bucket and a shelf lined with old notebooks, empty wrappers, and broken pens. The room was not abandoned. Someone had lived here for years, and they had not lived here alone. The next morning, Simmons returned to Mr. Whitlock's home with a search warrant, this time with charges. Mr. Whitlock answered the door calmly. But when Simmons read the warrant aloud, his face crumpled, not with confusion or anger, but with a kind of tired relief. "I was wondering," he said quietly, "how long it would take." He sat down, shoulders slumped, as though he'd been waiting to be caught for a decade. "What happened to the girls, Mr. Whitlock?" Simmons asked. He stared out the window. "They trusted me," he said. "They were so alone, and I made them feel understood. All three. That's all I wanted at first. And then a pause. "And Danielle?" Simmons asked. "She found out everything." He whispered. "She read the notes, the letters, the recordings." "You killed her?" Simmons pressed. He looked at her, something pained behind his eyes. "No, I couldn't. I locked her away in the school. I thought I could forget. I brought her food, books. I read to her for years." Simmons felt bile rise in her throat. "You locked your daughter in a basement for 10 years. Mr. Whitlock nodded slowly. "And when she stopped crying at night, I thought maybe she'd forgiven me." When the officers returned with Simmons to the school basement, they opened the door again, but this time, the mattress was gone, the shelf cleared, and the chain was broken. Simmons walked in, her flashlight trembling. On the wall, scratched, into the padding with a broken pen tip, were 6 words. "I'm still here. I remember everything." The news broke fast. The beloved teacher, the respected father, the grieving man who'd stood at candlelight vigils for 3 girls, he had killed them all. And as for Danielle, she hadn't been found yet, but her words were on the wall. Her memory was alive, and someone, somewhere, had helped her disappear again. Only this time, it was her choice. The story exploded across local radio and news. Beloved teacher accused of triple murder. 10 years in a school basement. The Danielle Whitlock story. People in the town couldn't believe it. Parents clutched their children tighter, and neighbors began rethinking every PTA meeting, every class trip, every smile Mr. Whitlock had ever offered. But the biggest question wasn't about the murders. It was about Danielle. Where was she? Detective Simmons knew she had a window, a small one, to find Danielle alive. A re-examination recheck of Whitlock's mansion home turned up something strange, an antique desk in his study, one Simmons had searched before. But this time, with Whitlock behind bars, she had time to explore more carefully. She noticed the grain of a wooden wood didn't match along one of the desk's panels. It was a false back panel. Inside was a photo album, dusty and handmade, with old Polaroids tucked inside photographs in plastic sleeves. Every photo was dated year by year, birthday by birthday, Danielle in the basement. At first, her face was frightened, hollowed and scared. By year 2, she looked numb. By year 5, she was staring directly at the camera, her eyes wide open, alert. But behind them, something else, a plan. Then came the breakthrough no one saw coming. An old man arrived at the police station trembling, holding a stack of weathered letters in his hands. It was the school's former janitor, the same one who'd accidentally uncovered the basement door 5 years ago. He carried a truth he'd never dared to share. The letters were from Danielle, one every year, left where she knew only he would find them, behind a broken tile in the boiler room. She'd begged him not to tell. She was waiting, watching, and listening. She had planned, a plan. And she'd written one final line in the last letter, dated just 3 weeks ago. "Tell them when he's gone. Tell them I'll return on my terms." With each new revelation, the town's unease grew. How could a girl survive alone for years under their very feet? Was she alive now, free, or still hiding, or worse, watching? The students who had once gone to school there were now adults. They brought their children past the campus, whispering, underthrowing. Some believed Danielle was dead. Others believed she had escaped and would never return. But Simmons believed one thing for sure. Danielle had waited for this moment, and she wasn't done yet. Late one evening, Simmons returned to the basement alone. She needed closure. She descended the creaking stairs and opened the steel door. The air was still colder than it should have been. The mattress was gone, the shelf cleared, but something had changed. A single paper crane sat in the center of the room, folded perfectly from a newspaper with an article about Whitlock's confession. Simmons stepped closer too. On the underside of the wing, someone had written in red marker, "Closure isn't justice." And in that moment, Simmons knew Danielle had been there, recently. Danielle's story had now become a whispered legend in the small town of Grayfield, Elmbridge. Mothers held their daughters closer, teachers avoided discussing the past, and the school tried to quietly retire the building that had once seemed so ordinary. But for Detective Simmons, there was nothing ordinary left in the story. Not after she'd stood in that cold basement and saw the paper crane with her own eyes. The local news had moved on, as it always did, to other crimes, other tragedies. But Simmons couldn't move on. Every time she tried to sleep, she saw Danielle's eyes from those photographs, so alert, so calculating. They didn't feel like a victim's gaze. They felt like someone watching, waiting, planning something bigger than anyone understood. She ordered one more sweep of the school grounds, even though it wasn't officially approved. A few trusted officers joined her at dusk. They retraced. Old hallways, now dusty with disuse. Room 14B, the girls' old classroom, had been left mostly untouched. Some books still sat on the shelves, a blackboard with half-erased words faintly reading, "Midterm exam Friday, don't forget." But Simmons noticed something behind the teacher's desk. The wall had hairline cracks where there shouldn't have been any. She tapped once, twice, hollow. She called for a sledgehammer. When they broke through the panel, it opened into what appeared to be another hidden storage area. Inside, to everyone's shock, they found a stack of VHS tapes, neatly piled, each labeled by year and month. There was also a pile of old journals belonging to Danielle. She had documented everything. The moment she was brought into the basement, what she saw, what she heard above her, the sounds of other girls being taken away in the night, and her realization that she alone had not been pregnant. Danielle had suspected something was different about her. Unlike the others, she wasn't showing any signs of change. When her father came to her, he never touched her the way he had hurt the others. He just sat there silently, watching her, talking to her, telling her how much danger she'd be in if she ever left. But she wasn't scared of the world outside. She was scared of what she might do if she ever got out. Because in that small underground space, Danielle had grown strong, not just in body, but in mind. She had trained herself to be patient, to study his movements, to learn the rhythm of fear. She knew the Peon came every Thursday. She knew what the pipes sounded like when someone walked past.
She knew every detail, every crack in the concrete, and she used that knowledge to survive. One journal entry stood out, dated a year before the arrest. They call it silence, but I call it survival strategy. They buried my friend's sisters in
the dark and thought the world would forget. But I'm still here. And I know everything. I know what he did to them. I know how he lied to the town. But I also know that I'm the only proof left. And I won't let the story end with his version. That entry haunted Simmons for days. A few weeks later, an envelope arrived at the police station with no return address. Inside was a single photograph. Danielle standing at the edge of a cliffside somewhere remote, her face turned away from the camera, her hair blowing in the wind. Written on the back were 3 words: "You found me." They traced the photo to a coastal town 3 states away. A few locals confirmed seeing a woman who matched her description. She lived quietly, worked at a bookstore, and went by a different name. She didn't talk much, but sometimes she looked at girls passing by on the street, as if she were remembering something painful. Simmons never attempted to contact her directly. There was a silent understanding. Danielle had told her story the way she needed to. She had exposed the monster who had walked in plain sight. She had endured unimaginable terror and still found a way to control her own story ending. What the town saw as a tragedy, Danielle had turned into her quiet rebellion. She didn't need a court date. She didn't need a headline. She had already won. And in the center of that old school basement, Next to the rusted bed frame, Simmons placed a new plaque. No name, no date, just a single inscription, etched in brass. She waited and she survived. The plaque in the basement became a point of silent pilgrimage for many. Not everyone knew the full story, but the ones who mattered did. Teachers who had taught the students girls and pretended to forget, neighbors who had heard screams and dismissed them as stray dogs, a janitor who once noticed a trail of red on the tiled floor and washed it away, never asking where it led. They came to that basement, stood for a moment, and left without a word. The plaque didn't need names. The silence had spoken louder than justice. But Detective Simmons wasn't done. Something about the journals Danielle left behind was too calculated, too careful. She hadn't just documented events. She documented timelines, sounds, faces, even phrases the teacher father used when no one else was around. One phrase appeared again and again in the entries. "It was never supposed to be like this." That line puzzled Simmons. It didn't sound like guilt. It sounded like regret. She reopened interviews with students who had graduated years earlier. One woman girl, now in her 30s, remembered something chilling. Back in the 90s, before the girls vanished, Mr. Whitlock Porter, the respected teacher, and father had hosted a series of late-night tutoring sessions in the old library wing. They weren't listed on the school calendar, and he only invited certain girls, all around the same age, all pretty, all quiet. When she asked why she wasn't invited, the woman hesitated. "I think because I talked too much, asked too many questions." Another puzzle piece fell into place. Meanwhile, forensic teams found something beneath the boiler room, hidden under layers of concrete and old pipes. It was a second trap door, smaller, older, not part of the school's original blueprints. When opened, the space revealed a hidden corridor, no more than 4 feet high, cold and silent. At the end was another door. Inside was a room with no windows, a single mattress, a rusted sink, and carved into the walls were dozens of tally marks, days, weeks, months. In one corner was a child's drawing, a stick figure holding hands with 3 others. Below them, one word: safe. That room had kept someone alive, but not safe. It was where Danielle had been held after the murders of her classmates, after her father had decided she was the only one he couldn't kill. His own daughter. But now it became clear he hadn't. Spared her out of love. He'd spared her because she was his insurance. If anyone ever got too close, if anyone found the bodies, he could bargain with her silence. Except Danielle never intended to stay silent forever. The final journal entry, buried under a floorboard, confirmed it. It wasn't just a confession. It was a plan. He made me believe I was weak, that I needed him, that no one would believe a girl with blood on her hands and fear in her voice. But I know now I was the only one who knew the truth. So I made myself forget until they were ready to remember. Simmons finally understood. Danielle didn't just survive. She waited. She waited until the school's memory had faded, until the building was scheduled for demolition, until the evidence would be gone. Then she made sure someone, anyone, would stumble into the basement. She wanted the bodies found, the journals, the truth. But she didn't want to be there when it happened, because being there would make her a victim again. So she vanished, just like the girls before her. But this time, she controlled the ending. The teacher, her father, never spoke after his arrest. He sat in his cell, staring at a blank wall, repeating the same sentence every morning when the guard brought his food. She wasn't supposed to remember, but she did. She remembered everything, and in a way, the town would never forget either. Months had passed since the truth surfaced. The school was sealed off permanently. No demolition, no reconstruction. The town council voted unanimously to preserve it as a memorial site, not for what the school had been, but for what it had hidden. Beneath its cheerful morning assemblies and honor boards had lived a truth so dark, the town would spend years peeling back its layers. Detective Simmons visited. Often, standing outside the main gate, watching time wash over the cracked brick and rusted bell. It wasn't guilt that brought her there, nor duty. It was the look in Danielle's eyes the last time she saw her. In the grainy footage from a nearby train station, the only known image of her after the case closed, she was wearing a plain hoodie, jeans, her hair tied back, no makeup, just a black journal tucked under one arm and a bus ticket in the other. A security camera caught her face for just 3 seconds, but for Simmons, it was enough. Danielle was free. Not just physically, but from the past her father had tried to bury her in. Simmons kept the footage on a flash drive, stored away in her desk drawer. She never shared it with the press, never gave it to the families. Danielle had earned that escape. She had endured hell. It wasn't survival anymore. It was reclamation. Meanwhile, the town grieved. A ceremony was held in the town square. 3. Wooden crosses for Ava, Brooke, and Claire, the girls whose lives had been taken far too soon. A 4th candle stood between them, unlit. It symbolized Danielle, not lost, but gone nonetheless. Claire's mother spoke at the event. "My daughter always believed people were good until proven otherwise," she said. "I think she would have wanted us to remember that not everyone knew what was happening, and not everyone looked away, on purpose." There wasn't a dry eye in the crowd. What shocked many was the presence of Mr. Whitlock's older brother, who stood in silence at the edge of the gathering. A retired paramedic, he'd spent his life saving others, never knowing what his sibling had destroyed behind the classroom walls. "I should have seen something," he said later to Simmons. But he was always the golden one, the loved one. We don't always recognize evil when it wears a familiar face. 1 year later, a new mural was painted across the outer wall of the school. It featured 4 girls standing side by side, holding hands, facing the sunrise. Their faces were abstract, deliberately left undefined, so they could belong to any girl from any town. Below the mural, a simple inscription: "For the voices they silenced, and the one who chose to speak." As for Danielle, rumors swirled that she moved to a small town in Oregon and became a librarian, that she wrote under a pseudonym and published a novel about loss and survival, that she volunteered at a shelter for abused teens, helping them find words for pain too heavy to carry alone. But no one knew for sure, and maybe that was the point. She had given the town its truth. She had lifted the weight of 3 graves. She had done what the police, the parents, the counselors, and the entire community couldn't do in 5 years, she remembered. And because of that, others never had to forget again.